Wake up, check my schedule, bus to class. During lunch, take a meeting. After that meeting, head off to an extracurricular, rush to work, scarf down dinner, and do as many readings as I possibly can before I collapse. Just to wake up and to do it all again the next day. This, or some variation of this, has been my schedule for as long as I can remember. Being raised in a success-driven society, where our productivity is measured by our worth, I felt the need to fill up my schedule to the absolute brim, to the point where I could hardly breathe. And even then, I still felt like it wasn't enough. Everyone around me seemed to have it all together. They seemed to know what they wanted to do, and were achieving more, getting more involved, while still remaining so driven. Whereas I, on the other hand, could only feel a sliver of accomplishment if I felt like both my calendar and myself were going to explode. I am the cookie-cutter example of someone who is overcommitted, and inevitably dealing with the consequences that come from the burnout after. Burnout was originally used to describe the gradual exhaustion, cynicism, and lack of commitment that came from human service jobs. These three symptoms, unsurprisingly, lead to reduced efficacy. In a study published by Madigan and Curran in 2020, it was shown that burnout is a significant negative predictor of academic achievement in students. And this is partially because the exhaustion that comes from this burnout completely depletes us physically and mentally. And the overcommitment to burnout pipeline is this perpetual cyclical cycle where you feel like you want to get involved, so then you overcommit, and after you overcommit, you burn out. And then once you burn out, you feel like you're not doing enough, and so you feel the need to get involved. And this cycle, it almost feels encouraged. And it's impossible to break out of because everyone around you is normalizing habits that contribute to it. Things like skipping meals to do work, pulling all-nighters, doing things just for the sake of a resume, or running on an absurd amount of caffeine and nothing else. When I found myself on the brink of exhaustion and the brink of burnout, I would ask myself, why am I stretched so thin? The answer was always, well, if I don't, I'm going to miss out on an opportunity. And the fear of missing out always dictated my decision on whether or not I would drop an extracurricular that I felt like I wasn't gaining anything from anymore. I had to stay in it because maybe something else would come of it. And then my fear of the unknown yelled at me from the back of my head as I convinced myself I would so much rather be so busy that I don't even have time to think about what I'm doing than to ever sit and maybe consider that I don't know what I want to do. My friend once gave me an analogy to help me realize these limitations that we have. And originally, this analogy was used to describe what it's like to be a chronically ill person to an able-bodied person. This theory is called the spoon theory, and today I'll be applying it in terms of burnout and exhaustion. Let's say your energy comes in a number of spoons, and everything that you do in your life takes up some form of energy. And the amount of spoons that it takes for you to complete a task is completely dependent on each person's personal limitations. And so, for me, getting out of bed might only take 1 spoon, but for someone else it could take 3. For a peer, it might take them 3 spoons to adequately study for that midterm, but for me, it could take 6. And what you commit yourself to and the things that you engage in, that will determine how many spoons you have left for yourself. And so there are some things where you need to spend spoons on, and this includes things like cooking a meal, going to work, going to school. Other spoons are a lot more optional to give up, so things like clubs, extracurriculars, going out with your friends, sports. Things like self-care and creative thinking, those also take up spoons. And that weird pit in your stomach, that stress you feel when you're burnt out, that's also using up your spoons. And each and every day, you just have this limited number of spoons. And it's so important that you invest those into things that align with your values. Because when you don't, you're running out of them and slowly starting to lose bits and pieces of yourself. I had found myself spoonless, in spoon debt, if you will. There's a plethora of reasons for this. Some of them include fear of not being employed, the threat of having some sort of financial commitment, making my parents proud, not letting the people who depend on me down, to solve my inferiority complex even, and to stop the constant murmuring in the back of my head that I am not enough. My life was essentially just this external spoon giveaway, where everything got one of my spoons except for me. And although I was doing things in my calendar that looked productive, I felt incapable of being fulfilled. I had spent so many of my spoons on everything else that I had no spoons to feel like a real person anymore. As a university student, it feels like there's this constant pressure of the future and the need to know what you want to do and the need to have the skills and experience to be equipped for that. And so the only way to feel like you're being productive is to get involved, gain experience, expand your horizons, to try new things. And all of those are great things to be doing and things that you should be doing. Until this narrative becomes, if you're not involved, do you even care about what you want to do in the future? By the way, if you don't get good grades, you're not going to get hired. Also, those good grades actually don't mean anything if you don't have relevant experience, but that relevant experience is almost impossible to find because no one's going to share that resource with you. And so you found that relevant experience, but actually it doesn't matter because the person who interviewed before you already had that experience. Sound familiar? We, as a collective, have glorified overcommitment and burnout. And this mindset of feeling the need to be overcommitted, it feels like you're running on this treadmill where you get on and you're going to reach a goal. And so you run and you reach this goal, but the happiness and the fulfillment that you feel when you're at that goal isn't enough. And so you run to get another one, and another one, and another one. It is so ingrained in me that if I am not running, I am failing. So I ran. And I collected all of these sections on my resume. And so you would think that when I stare at this master's CV, I would feel some sense of pride, joy, maybe even like a little bit of happiness in there somewhere. But instead, I just felt like I had to add more. As I looked at the Times New Roman bullet points on my screen, I realized that these words don't actually mean anything to me. This 2-page, single-spaced document taunted me because it knew that I had no idea who I was beyond this document. I didn't know what I cared about, and every single time I gathered something where I could put it on the end of my master's CV or curate a LinkedIn post for it, I could never actually feel that success because I either didn't care about what I had just done or was so exhausted and drained that I didn't even know what it would be like to experience that success. And so, who was I as a human being? What did I, as someone who breathes and goes through my day-to-day life, actually value? What do I care about? Actually, how do I figure out what I care about when I hardly have enough time to eat? Or more realistically, remember to eat? I had no idea who I was anymore. I'd completely lost a sense of self. So I knew something had to change. So I just did what I do best. I Marie Kondo'd my entire life. I just looked at every single commitment I was in, every single relationship I was in, the people I was speaking to, the engagements I was involved in, and asked, does this bring me joy? And so, does spending 10 hours at the library straight for 2 weeks for finals bring me any joy? Absolutely not. But spending a productive 4 does, because I know it'll bring me some sort of success and pave towards my degree. Does taking an easy A course that I actually have no interest in at all bring me any joy? No, but maybe taking that philosophy course that might spark my interest will. Does feeling like I'm constantly being chased by this looming endless abyss because I never stop to even think about what's going on bring me any joy? Not at all. In fact, I should probably sit and think about that one. And doing this, it made me feel a little bit more lost. I felt like my head wasn't on right, I was misorientated because every single thing that I said brought me joy didn't feel like it paved me towards my long-term path. I just felt like my head wasn't even screwed on right anymore. Did I even care? But it wasn't that I didn't care about my long-term goals. It was that I didn't ever fulfill my short-term ones that I couldn't even fathom what that would look like. Short-term goals like developing an eating and sleeping schedule, seeing people you care about, finding a hobby. These are all important as well. The present you deserves just the same amount of time and care and energy as you invest into future you, because you are so much more than one career or academic-orientated goal. The beauty of being alive and the beauty of being a human being is to be able to be multifaceted and to have that dimension. So now I know there are still things that bring me joy, and there are still things that I find intrinsic value in. And this was great news. But now I had to actually do them, which meant that I had to go back into my life and collect a couple of spoons back so I could allocate that towards these tasks. I spent the first 2 years of my university career completely spoonless. I just thought that was normal. Everyone around me was doing it. And so breaking that status quo and having to collect these spoons back was by no means an easy feat, especially as an overthinker with a crippling fear of letting other people down. What helped me a little bit, though, was to realize that when I choose to spend my time on things that I know bring me no value, and I know I have no growth, and I leave feeling miserable every time, I'm not only wasting my spoons, I'm also robbing someone else of a potentially valuable experience. By holding all of these positions and roles, I wasn't gaining something, and I might actually be stealing something from someone else who is looking for that opportunity. And so with this shift in mindset, I slowly started to go through the tasks that I was doing, the roles that I was in, and delegated things that I didn't feel like I could grow in anymore. And slowly but surely, I started to collect back a couple of spoons just for me. And with all of these newfound spoons, I knew that I had to take control. I knew that these spoons had to go somewhere where I could find value. Because as individuals who choose to spend our spoons on things that don't bring us intrinsic value or have any real necessity in our lives, we perpetuate to this endless overcommitment cycle. When you choose to take your energy and your time and go into a position where you leave miserable, you're not only costing yourself spoons in that moment, it's going to cost you spoons later on when that burnout eventually hits. And so I started to navigate my life with my personally created values, on the things that I had reflected on, and chose to put that time and energy towards things that I felt a little bit of fulfillment after. And the breath of fresh air that I got was insane. I felt like I could breathe again. I felt like I was a real person again. Because I realized that when I was navigating my life and committing myself to tasks that fulfilled me, it wasn't just the act of throwing my spoons at things. I wasn't just giving them away, and it wasn't just a draining abyss. I was actually getting an exchange of spoons. There was an exchange of energy happening. And I would leave that commitment feeling a little bit more energized. And getting to this position was no easy feat, but it initially started with just reflecting on what I was involved in and deciding whether or not this aligned with my values, and above all, figuring out what my values actually were, independent of those around me. After I had a general idea of what my long-term and my short-term goals were going to be, I had to walk the walk. I had to leave commitments that no longer brought me any sense of fulfillment and dedicate that time towards centering my experiences around things that would bring me peace. And from there on out, it was just constantly checking in with myself and asking, does this align with my values, and is this something that I actively want and choose to do? And this entire process took a lot of time, and it was extremely mentally challenging, because the dissonance that I felt when I was doing this was so harsh. I felt like I was being torn between these two ends, where on one end of the spectrum, I was a good, studious, academically well-off student. On the other hand, I was a real, living, breathing human being who could feel things. And I was just being torn between these two sides. But as I slowly started to do these actions, I started to realize a couple of things. I firstly realized that almost everyone around me experienced this to some degree. University students, people in jobs, middle school students, high school students are all being pushed towards this cycle of overcommitment. And I also realized that something needs to change before our entire generation just burns out like a light bulb. But personally, I learned that I can be a good academic, studious student and a real, live, living person at the same time. And I learned that it's okay for me to protect my peace, and that there are still ways where I can be productive without feeling drained at the end of every single night. And so don't get me wrong, I'm still extremely busy, but being busy isn't the same thing as being overcommitted. Because 2 years ago, or even last year, I would look at my calendar and I would just feel this hit in my stomach and this sense of hopelessness, knowing that I had to do all of these things that I had no passion for and didn't really care about. But today, when I look at that same schedule, I feel excited. I enjoy being able to be a part of teams that are taking on projects that I'm passionate about. I enjoy learning about things like drug action and Aristotle's biology. And I enjoy making time to spend with those that I care about. My schedule today runs a very similar course to the way it did before. Wake up, check my schedule, go to a spin class. After a spin class, go learn about some drugs and diseases. Then I would go grab a bite with my friend for lunch before I go take a meeting on a new sustainability project that I'm lucky to be spearheading. After that, I'll go philosophize a little bit in ancient moral philosophy before I go and then take another meeting with a lovely, lovely committee. After my committee meeting, I'll walk home, and on the walk home, I'll call my parents. And then once I get home, I'm gonna eat a meal that I begrudgingly, but I'm so grateful that I meal prepped for. And after all that's done, I'm gonna sit down, do some flashcards and readings, and reply to emails before I go to bed, excited to do it again the next day. Today, I no longer feel that constant threat of overcommitment looming in the back of my head. I no longer feel like I'm just a shell of a person I used to be. Today, I am excited to take on my furiously busy schedule and see where it takes me. Thank you.